If you came from Canon land like I did, you have been waiting years for this type of release. I was waiting so long that I didn't want to wait anymore, and I jumped ship to Sony. I had a Canon C70 and it hit so many of the checklist items that I had for me to run a successful shoot. But there was just a couple of little things that made me want to explore different camera options, and then there was big things that made me want to not be invested in Canon anymore. So for this video, the C400 looks very, very enticing, but Canon had to release this. They have been going years without making a flagship style, full frame RF mount camera that was built for production. Do they have full frame cameras? They have a bunch. Do they have RF cameras? They have a bunch. They don't have one that is made for the industry professional who is needing proper input and output, that is needing a lot of the items that is required for these types of shoots. You can rig up cameras. I rigged up my C70 to make it fit into that role, but you're always compromising when you're doing that. You're introducing vulnerability points, and it's not designed for that. So when I had the C70, it was great. I typically work in corporate and dock space. It was amazing to have a small little camera with 10 stops of ND, autofocus, 4K 120, dual slot card recording. It was great, but I was moving into productions where I needed to have a longer camera. I needed to have SDI, I needed to have BNC time code. I needed to have a bunch of different things, and I was waiting. Canon, I'll keep the C70. You introduce a newer camera, right? Because the only ones that are available a few years ago was the C300 III and 500 Mark II, and they're both EF mount. I don't want to buy and invest a bunch of money in an outdated lens mount system. Furthermore, if you did buy the C500 Mark II, they did a massive price cut. As the consumer, that does not instill confidence in me to want to invest in that product or in that company, much less the product line. So you have people who have C70s and they're doing great, but you don't have a proper A and B cam. If you go down from the C70, you have the R5, which has some overheating issues, doesn't have internal ND, doesn't take the same battery type, doesn't have the same sensor size. So you go to the R5C and you have the same problems, different sensor sizes. And every time you go to one other camera to get a proper A and B cam, you have to give up one thing and lose this one, but gain that. This is what pushed me ultimately over to Sony. Their product line is a vertical ladder. You could start with the FX30 and then go to the FX3, 6, 9, as far as you want to go. At the same time, you are always retaining that E-mount. And only at the bottom of that product line is a different sensor size. Everything from A7S III up, exact same sensor size, which is fantastic if you are investing in this company for the foreseeable future. That's why I jumped ship, because I was waiting for a C400. It didn't come, but now it is here. So I just gave you a bunch of backstory about why I didn't want to wait around for it. And now that it's released, I'm glad I didn't, because I would have had to wait too long. So let's get on to some of the good things about this new release. The triple base ISO adds so much flexibility. It has the same as the FX6, which is the camera that I have, 800 and 12,800, but it adds an intermediary one at 3,200. That could be very, very useful. I'm glad the FX6 goes up to 12,800 because I can always add ND. But why not get a third one? That sounds great. The USB-C for the EVF or the LCD screen. This is so nice to not have a proprietary cable that allows the user to change the distance. So when you're shoulder operating, a lot of times the way the camera is built, the LCD screen is way too close. So you have to find ways to push it out with arms, whatever, and then you get into the limitations of the cable size that the company designs. I have the same issue with my FX6. Let me show you. So this is what I have introduced to my camera. There is an arm here that it pushes this monitor out forward. So when it is on a shoulder mount, I can go like this and I have easy viewing distance. I'm limited by the, well, if I was using the EVF, I would be limited by the proprietary cable, which is why I have chosen this, because it's sharper, brighter, and overall is a better viewing experience. Now that you can just do USB-C, you can choose any length you want. You can choose different types of cables. This is gonna make shooting so much easier for you to design exactly where you want it. Say you're shooting sports, the camera's way forward on a tripod and you're way back here, you can bring that monitor all the way back with the desired USB-C length that you want. Gain dials on the left side. I don't know why that was ever on the right side with the C300 Mark III, but if you're an operator, you wanna adjust your dials here because you can't see on this side of the camera. And if you're having an AC, it doesn't really make sense that they would be adjusting if you're listening. It makes sense to have it on the operator side. What else do we got? SDI, always a fan. Internal ND, fantastic. The toggle on the rear reminds me of a C100 Mark II, and that was an amazing camera. And then we kind of get into some of the things that I don't like. The Mini XLR is not a huge issue, but I don't understand why it's an issue. Why is it present? For this type of camera, the way it's designed and the features that it has is either designed to be a single operator, single crew member, doing everything, sound, audio, everything into this camera, or you're putting it into a production with more crew members. And if you're gonna do that, your sound guy would appreciate having universal size ports. Same thing when you're working with the C70 and you have to go to HDMI, it works, but it would be nicer to have these more industry style ports, SDI, full size XLR, and a couple of other things that make it an easier tool to throw into any production. If I'm doing everything myself, of course, I can grab the correct HDMI size, the correct XLR size, and I know what works. But I think the limitation doesn't really have a reason, so I'm a little confused on that. And it just, I don't see why it was implemented, because if people are gonna say it's because of the size of the camera, it's bigger than the FX6, and the FX6 has full size. I guess if you're upgrading from a C70, this would be great because of that thing I mentioned before. When you're switching between A and B cams, you have to use different sizes of everything. So this one, I guess you could keep your mini XLR cables for your C70 and they will work with your C400. This is such a good product release. And I know so many people who are invested in Canon who were not allowed to leave by themselves because they were financially constricted to this. They could not sell off their EF or RF lenses without taking an insane hit. And they are so excited that they now have a matching camera to their C70 or their R5C, something with a production style that has the current mount, current sensor technology. I'm a little surprised it's not a DGO sensor, but I know they are so happy that they can now move forward. It felt like Canon was just stuck for so long and their users were waiting, saying, you have this mount in this camera, you have the sensor in this camera, and you have the camera design in this camera. Can you please just put it together so we can buy it? And that waiting period is why I left, but I have nothing bad to say about Canon products. I just think their product segmentation or their feature segmentation throughout their products makes no sense. There is a little bit of that in Sony too, where if you go down lower, you get a better feature, but it's simple stuff like focus breathing compensation. That's not a big issue. Having the same ports, the same sensor sizes, the same mounts, that's a huge issue. So I think this will sell really, really well because the Canon customer base has been waiting for something like this. I think it's a little too late to capture the market now. This product only retains Canon customers. I don't see it bringing anybody else in from Sony, possibly from the Panasonic Lumix area, because they also don't have a production style camera. The last one was the EVA 1, and that didn't take off either. So it's great that they have released this. It's a little overdue. It could potentially slowly bring Canon back, but right now, all it does is bring them to the same level as the other big players. So that's my initial reaction. I know a couple of people who are going to buy this. They are so stoked for it. And if Canon just keeps moving forward with this, keeping up with the modern types of offerings from other camera brands, then their customer base, their foothold in the industry, I think will stay. Otherwise, if not, they're going to keep their photographers, anybody using their RF lenses, and then all the people who had invested tons of money in the EF are going to start looking for other options because they won't be financially tied down anymore. And I know they just released the ability for third parties to make RF lenses, but I believe it's only Super 35, and I think that's kicking themselves in the butt, because if they release it to make anybody, any third party, make RF lenses, you allow for a different type of customer. Right now, the RF lens customer is okay with paying a bunch of money for a premium lens, but you have so many others who are in the Sigma price range or the Tamron price range, and they will happily stay in that mount or in that brand of camera as long as they can get their cheaper lenses, and that's what's holding them in there. So I think Canon needs to think about the longevity of their customers, not just getting people who can pay $2 to $3 grand per lens, but more so growing a customer, starting with a lower tier camera and letting, as their career evolves, they are able to climb the ladder through their products. And I don't know, we'll see how it goes, but C400 is definitely a win.